What people request for the most and they see the best performance from, and you see a lot of this out there, is a brass barrel. This is an 18-inch brass barrel. So brass can give you the best performance. If you do the math and compare it to a 495 or 509, it's actually a little bit bigger than a 495. However, the greater performance comes through the amazing consistency in these brass tubing. These tubings are used by hobbyists who build aircraft and other precision things in their hobbies. I'm not quite sure what they actually use it for. But the wall thickness is 14 thousandths of an inch, 0.014, and it's amazingly consistent all the way through. So consistent that nerfers in the past, and they still do this today, make sealed breeches just by putting one size over the other size, and it's like an air glide friction fit. So if you're familiar with an air table, an air hockey table, that air provides like a little layer of friction, and that kind of happens in here. The wall thicknesses are so close together that it'll glide across each other. For example, this will just slide in, and it's like even though it doesn't have an O-ring on it, you can still get just from that overlap, you can just get a really good air seal. The problem with brass though is it gives you really good performance. This is an 18-inch brass barrel, so you can easily hit close to 300 FPS by using this and getting your air seal optimized. However, the problem with brass is it is a very soft metal. It's even more soft than aluminum and copper. So if you drop it, it'll ding up your barrel. It'll get dents in it really easy. And if you drop, say, where you need to have the air seal at, where your ram would go into, it can really damage your performance. And if you play outdoors very often and you're aggressive, you could end up getting a lot of dirt on your dart. So if you just pick up a dart that has some dirt on it and you load it through, that can actually scrape up the inside of your barrel, wearing it out quicker. Also, if you're playing close quarters or you like to move more when you're playing, you risk the chance of like a longer barrel hitting into something and just bending your barrel entirely. A lot of people will just end up breaking their brass barrels because they're not the most durable in the world. So I personally prefer to run with an aluminum barrel because they're cheaper to replace, they're less picky on their dart fit, and they're easier to maintain, and you don't have to be as careful with them. The brass, similar to a 495, has a really tight fit. So your dart, if it has a wide head, you cannot use brass. If your dart, it has a head wider than the foam body, it'll often get jammed because the rubber will create too much friction on the brass and get stuck in the barrel. Another problem that you can have is if you're loading very quickly and you slam a dart in there, it's a tight fit. So if you're loading a dart and it's crooked at all, or you're using a really fast load, if it's not straight in there, you can actually pinch your dart and end up squishing it. Some people call it dart chew. It can chew up your darts or cut your darts. So you can have to be more deliberate in your loading. So if you're rapid firing, brass is definitely the worst option for you unless you have an insanely accurate system and it's very well maintained. Another problem with brass is it's so tight that a full length dart, this is a half length dart, a full length dart will be about twice as long. So you've got twice as much surface area, causing a lot more potential friction in it. So if you're trying to ram rod into the brass, you're going to be trying to push a dart that's a tight fit with the back of the foam. And so you'll have the dart can sometimes get too much friction and then it'll buckle on the end of it and your dart will end up being squished. So that's a bigger problem with full length darts because they have a lot more friction. You don't have a problem as much with half length darts at all. If you are having problems with that in your own breech and you have a pusher setup, you may want to switch to a sleeper brass setup or an angel breech or other things that people call them these days, where it basically chambers the dart with brass rather than pushing it into the brass. It gets kind of chambered. So it's a different setup for a different day we can talk about. But if you want the best performance with a brass barrel, for example, Bradley Phillips will have brass barrels on most of his builds and he can achieve very high performance. It's a very smooth bore. And if you're really intense like Chris Cartea, you can actually lubricate the inside of your barrel, add a little bit of coating to it to decrease the friction even further. And that's where you can get even more performance. But if you're shooting for 300 FPS or just the high 200s, there's a lot of easier ways than trying to polish the inside of a tube. So we've talked about the different barrel options. The brass barrel itself, because it is actually a smaller size than all the aluminum barrels, it's 17/32, you can't use the same muzzle devices and scars and barrels as you would as a normal 5/8 barrel. So 5/8 is about 16 millimeter for your scars. For 1732, you have to get a scar that's made to fit 1732 brass. And there's another problem if you're making your barrel have a 19 or 932, then you have to get a whole nother size as well. So the problem with it is the caliber and town claw and similar platforms will usually be built around a 5/8 barrel. However, with this thinner barrel, you're not going to be able to mount it in the same system because the diameters are different. And the way that these are mounted in the newest version of the town claw and caliber is just one screw that's tightened up against the barrel. So if you tighten it up against your barrel, you're going to be driving a screw straight into your barrel at one point. There's just one screw from the bottom. Some like the U series has two screws, one in the mag well, one in the muzzle, but that's just putting a clamping force in one spot on your barrel. And brass is so soft, if you try that, you will end up deforming your brass. And so what we've done is we've gone back to an older style muzzle. Here is a caliber muzzle that's made for brass. The hole is just made smaller, and it uses the plastic piece of the print as a clamp. So instead of driving a screw, which is a hard steel metal, into your brass, you're actually just squeezing it and having that plastic wrap around the brass, more distributed force, and it distributes the pressure evenly. So it has a much less chance of squishing your brass. And so it just is a nice push fit in the barrel, and then you just put a screw in that hole and it holds it nice and tight. And if you get a good fit on there, that's all you need to hold your barrel in. Because it's printed, 3D printed, and it's just plastic, it is possible, especially if you're playing in extreme weather, that you can wear out this piece or just lose its tension over time, just like any clamp. But you can actually wrap just some tape around your barrel to make it fit better. And most people, after they get their barrel set up, set right, perfect, they like it, they'll actually just super glue it in place because they're not going to have to change it. And if they do change it, they're going to change it to something pretty specific. And so having more than one muzzle is not a problem for those types of people. But if you're looking to do quick changes or experiment around, you can just put a screw in it and it'll hold on for a good amount of time before wearing out. The other thing different about brass is because brass, we talked about the fit and pushing a dart straight in is difficult to do. Most brass breeches will have some sort of coupler or adapter. So this one has a 9/16 receiver, 9/16 brass glued onto the 1732. That's just done with super glue. What we've done is measure the length we need. So about half of the dart is loaded into the tighter brass, the 1732, inside of the 9/16. So it'll sit about there. So you have half the dart loaded in to the brass. We don't want to push the whole thing in because it creates a lot of friction. And in the caliber setup, your pusher to have the O-rings sit onto the 9/16 will actually leave a bit of a problem here because you can't push straight into the 1732. So you want to have, if you want to use the default ram, you then again need the adapter, or I call it the receiver, on the barrel in order to chamber your dart. For more increased efficiency and more power, you also have the ram, which mates with the barrel. The default rams have about 0.43 inner diameter. That's just the inner bore of the airflow. However, it's a pretty small hole, and people have done science about this in research, but the smaller the hole, you basically create a choke point for the air. The air can't push through as well. So you're basically decreasing the amount of airflow that's able to go through your barrel. There's a lot of people who are very sciencey about it, who can speculate all day about it, and it's really hard to put a finite number on it because there's so many variables. However, people have noticed an increase in performance by changing their ramrod to a larger bore. So here is a metal ramrod with an aluminum ram base with a brass ram core. Similar to this one here, different base material, just because it has more durability and it looks cool. But the ram core has a larger inner diameter for better airflow, so you have less restriction in your air. However, technically, there's something called dead space where that extra volume there sits behind the dart. So all the air you're pushing into it behind the dart technically gets compressed inside of this brass. And so the more volume left behind your dart in the ram creates a dead space where the air in there is just dead air. It's not helping you out. So you have more dead space, but better airflow. So it's a trade-off between less dead space and less airflow. So plenty of people have speculated on what's better or not. However, in general, the brass ram core gives you better performance. However, because you're using a brass ram, it is not compatible with other barrel types, and there's no O-ring either, so you'd lose the benefit of that air seal. So it's a trade-off again. So if you have a brass barrel, you can get a brass ram that mates in, and you get that good air seal, and you're just using the brass as a pusher, pushes the dart in and loads it, and you get that nice air seal between the really tight tolerances of the brass, and you don't have to worry about O-rings or anything. However, if you like the less dead space and the Vanguard dog bone notched down benefit of an aluminum ram core, you can use that still to have an air seal in your brass. The O-rings on a default ram will seal in the 9/16 brass, so that's an option for you. You will get a little bit decreased performance, but then you have that fast loading of the Vanguard ram core option as well, and you no longer have to spend the additional money or the extra work in making a brass ram. You can just keep your old ram, get a brass barrel to get that extra boost. However, if you want a greater boost, you can go with the all brass ram core. That's about it for barrels, and most of that's it for ram cores. We'll talk more about that later. But to show you guys real quick how to install a brass barrel, if you buy a brass barrel from us, you'll get the barrel with the receiver as the barrel portion, and you'll get a muzzle with the hardware needed to install it. Optionally, you can also get a ram core or ram base with it. This is a brass ram core to be installed in a modified ram base. This has been bored out for 17/32 ram core because the default ram core is 1/2 inch, so it needs a bigger hole, but it installs the same way. It's just a press fit or a push fit. You like to apply some glue on the inside of the ram before pressing it in to make sure the air seal is great. There's no leaking air out of this ram. It is a nice press fit. The default ram gets a similar air seal, but when you order a brass barrel from us, you don't necessarily have to get a brass ram. However, we highly recommend it. You can still use a default ram in it. However, it does leak a little bit if the ram is off center. So personally, I'd recommend the brass ram for a much better air seal. There's like no leaking in that at all. So you get a much more consistent performance. However, if you're okay with some variants, you can just get the brass barrel.